Neoshadowing reports confirm that the world has experienced its hottest 12th month on record. The world has experienced its hottest 12-month period in recorded history. That's according data released by climate central scientists who found human-induced climate change has significantly elevated temperatures around the world. For more, we can speak now to Hannah Handel, a delegate to the United Nations Climate Change Conferences. She is also a public policy specialist and researcher at Stanford University. Hannah Handel, thank you for your time. How concerning is this global temperature rise coming off the back of the record hotter October? Yeah, so I think it's concerning in this sense. One thing we think try to do, gold has been stated over and over within the climate change community is that we want to limit global average temperature increase to no more than 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. And so that's kind of ratio that's been chosen as really the barometer after which the effects of climate change will especially catastrophic and difficult to come back from. So we must stay below that threshold. And the parliament is this heat wave has having, we're getting closer and closer to breaking that barrier. And when we look at that picture long time, it's not a pretty one. So drought is gripping the United States, where heat waves are especially bad, saying in Houston, Texas, that suffered through 22-day heat streak. It is being felt more acutely in some part of the world. Yeah, I think absolutely. We certainly know that some of the worlds are experiencing front of climate change, and unfortunately, those often tend to be part of the world that very little to contribute to public. The first place is to say they are not the historical matter, but they are really getting the short end of the stick. And I think that's going to be a huge topic that hopefully we'll be addressing at the upcoming climate change conference COP28. This idea of how to build up adaptation, migration, and resilience in these communities that are unfortunately bearing the brunt of crisis but really need to toll to weather this storm impact. So in Australia, we've committed to net zero by 2050, but there are calls for a 2035 place. How ambitious do nations need to be a COP28 in Dubai, which you just mentioned, that begins at the end of the month? Yeah, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change had said that we need a 43% reduction in greenhouse gas emission by 2030 relative to 2019 level to handle on this crisis and to keep the goal of the 1.5 degrees Celsius I mentioned earlier within reach. So we definitely need to fire an all cylinder, and part of that ambition, those targets are, set up these COP conferences, but really becomes up to the individual country to remain accountable and see through their end of the bargain. So that's what I'm keeping eye on and going into the upcoming conference. Is there the sense that Dubai and the UAE is an suburb hot for such a conference? For instance, we protest to be allowed. You can't be detained in Dubai for such action. Well, a lot of conferences that will see activists and youth in particular try to take on this sort of advocacy role and really make their voices heard. I mean, since in previous conferences as well, I think that's part of a healthy and robust dialogue. I hope we continue to see those type of voice being heard. I think we need voice heard from all across the spectrum, especially those vulnerable community that we are talking about earlier, those one really in bearing the brunt of the crisis, and you need to tool and funding to build up resilience measures. So, I hope people sort of come together, and I hope the advocacy is a huge part, because it really, the public is that other stakeholder that, sometimes it's not completely feeling represented in these spaces. But we've seen before the public able to really make their voices heard in this forum. I hope we'll see something like that again. This is question over the COP President's diagnosis in Sultan Al Jaber, the UAE Special Envoy for Climate Change. He is also the chief executive of the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company. Surely those two roles are incompatible. Well, we definitely know that tackling greenhouse gas emission is huge to keeping again with that 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold. In particular, methane is big one. According to in a government's panel on climate change, why not cut methane emissions by 1/3 by 2030 relative to 2020 level? So absolutely, we need to look at a greenhouse gas emission as a source of human-induced climate change, and really first efforts there. So I hope the conference will continue to tackle that as we try to in past conferences as well. That's an answer to different question. The question I asked was about the president's diagnosis who leading these talks. Can you have the head of the oil company leading talks about reducing climate emission? Well, I think regardless of where the talking is taking place or who's involved in it, we have to have basic parameter being set in terms of agreeing that greenhouse gas emission must be cut in order for us to reach our climate target. You don't have a problem with the boss of the oil company leading this conversation. Well, I want the topic of these conversations to focus on cutting greenhouse gas emission. Absolutely, I think whoever is over this conversation, that does need to be centerpiece of them. Okay, Hannah Handel, thank you so much for your time, and hopefully we'll speak to you again when you are in Dubai for a conference. What more? The world has experienced its hottest 12-month period in recording history. That's according today by released by climate center scientists who found human-induced climate change has significantly elevated temperature around the world. For more, we can speak now to Hannah Handel, a delegate to United Nations Climate Change Conferences. She is also a public policy specialist and researcher at Stanford University. Hannah Handel, thank you for your time. How can you sponsor this global temperature rise coming off the back of the record hotter October? Yeah, so I think it's concerning in the sense one thing we've been trying to do, our goal has been stated over and over within the climate change community is that we want to limit global average temperature increase to no more than 1.5 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial level. And so it's a kind of ratio that's been chosen as really the parameter after which that effect of climate change will be especially catastrophic and difficult to come back from. So we want to still below the threshold, and the primary is with this heat wave we've been having, we are getting close and closer to breaking down the barrier, and when we look at the picture long term, it's not a pretty one. Okay, so dry stripping the United States with a heat wave are exceptionally bad, saying in Houston, Texas, that's the first through a 22-day heat streak. Is this being felt more acutely in some part of the world? I think absolutely. We certainly know that some part of the world are experiencing the brunt of climate change, and unfortunately, those often tend to be part of the world that very little to contribute to public in first place when they say they are not the historical matter, but they are really getting short of end of stake. And I think that's gonna be a huge topic that hopefully we'll be addressing at the upcoming climate change conference, COP28. This idea of how do we build up adaptation, mitigation, and resiliences in this community that are unfortunately bearing the brunt of the crisis, but really need to tools to weather these storms and impact. So in Australia, we committed to net zero by 2050, but they are called for a 2035 place. How ambition do nation need to be COP28 in Dubai, which you just mentioned, that begin at the end of the month? Yeah, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has said that we need a 43% reduction in greenhouse gas emission by 2030 relative to 2019 level to handle on this crisis and to keep that goal of the 1.5 degrees Celsius that I mentioned earlier with and reach. So we definitely need to fire on all solidarity, and part of that ambition, those targets are, set at these COP conferences, but really become up to the individual country to remain accountable and see through this end of bargain. So that's what I'm keeping an eye on going into the coming conference. Is there a sense that Dubai and the UAE is an unstable host for such a conference? For instance, we protest be allowed, you can't be detained in Dubai for such action. Well, a lot of conferences that will see activists and youth in particular try to take this sort of advocacy role and really make their voices heard. I mean, in the previous conference as well, and I think that's part of Earth and Rivers dialogue. And hope we continue to see those type of voice being heard. I think we need voice heard from all across the spectrum, especially the vulnerable community we are talking about earlier, those one really bearing of the brunt this crisis and who need the tool and the funding to develop resilience measures. So I hope people sort of come together, and I hope the advocacy is a huge part, because it really the public is that other stakeholder that sometimes it's not completely feeling represented in this spaces. But we've seen before the public able to really make their voices heard in this form, and I hope we've seen something like that again. There's also question over the COP president's diagnosis in Sultan Al Jalbaba, UAE Special Envoy for Climate Change. He is also chief executive in the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company. Surely those two roles are incompatible. Well, we definitely know that targeting greenhouse gas emission is huge to keeping again within 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold. In particular, methane is big one. According to Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, we want to cut methane emission by 1/3 by 2030 relative to 22 level. So absolutely, we need to look at greenhouse gas emission as a source of human-induced climate change and really focus our efforts there. So I hope the conference will continue to tackle that as we try to in past conference as well. That's an answer to different question. The question I asked was about the president's diagnosis who leading this talk. Can you have the head of oil company leading talks about reducing climate emission? Well, I think regardless of where these talks is taking place or if what involves in the way have to have, basic perimeter big setting in terms of the greenhouse gas emission must be cut in order for us to reach our climate change. You don't have a problem with the boss of oil and company leading this conversation. Well, I want the topic of this conversation to focus on cutting greenhouse gas emission. Absolutely. I think whoever is involved in this conversation, that just need to be centerpiece of them. Okay, Hannah Handel, thank you so much for your time, and hopefully we speak to you again when you are in Dubai for a conference.